Good afternoon. Thank you for the introduction. I'm going to be talking about mastering cash flow management for startups. My name is Maya, for those who don't know me. I qualified with PwC in the UK years and years ago, and then I worked in London. I was in investment banking and trading in commodities sector, and I worked for Morgan Stanley for a number of years before I came to Oman. And since I've been in Oman, I've been working with startups and small companies, and I love it. I love it. Always on the finance side. So I used to work for SAS, and now I have my own company. So one of the things that I discovered over the years working with startups is that they hate finance and numbers. They run away, partly because it's not their expertise, partly because there is so much that they could measure and they don't know where to start. So one of the things that I did was kind of compartmentalize some of the things that they could measure at different stages of their startup. So these are the stages, in my view, of the startup and how it works. So they start off with an idea. They then try to build that idea out, just as a test to see, can they get customers, does it work, do they have a market for it? They then launch their product, and at that point, they start to try and get paying customers. Once that solidifies, and once they start to get the customer feedback on what their product is like, are they willing to pay for it, how much are they willing to pay for it, they then start to grow. And that growth can look differently depending on the startup. It can be a diversification of growth in their own area, or they could try to go outside, so outside the country that they are in. And maturity is what everybody dreams of. So that's the sale, the IPO, the exit, that's where maturity is. Now, the funding stages also differs at each stage of a startup's life. So initially, they have to fund it themselves, or they have to go to friends and family, they have to ask for money. If they're lucky, there are grants in the area. And there are a couple of venture capital firms that will invest in a startup at idea stage, but they're very few and far between. As they go through the life of their startup, they then start to be able to approach different types of investors. So they start off with angels and VCs, continue at launch with angels and VCs, and then at growth stage, it's mainly VCs. And some of the things that I think, if you want to break it down of what they could measure in each of these stages. So at idea stage, it's really important, cash flow, because you don't have any. You don't have any money usually at that point. What the market size looks like, and what is your competition. And to look at the business model. At that point, you're only theoretically looking at your business model. You actually don't know exactly how it's going to work. You don't know how your customers are going to react to your product. You don't know what your real costs are like. But you should have a go at it. You should do some research, sit down and go through it. As you build your prototype, you have to look at your cash flow again. Then you start to look at the pricing. You know, what does my competition do? How much can my customers pay for it? What will my cost look like? And you start to think about your pricing. And then you start to look at funding, because you know that as you launch, you're going to need money. And this funding process takes a long time, especially at the moment. So, and to look at funding, usually you have to give equity away. So the valuation of your startup starts to become an issue and starts to become something you need to look at. As you launch, you start to get more serious. And now you have some real historical data that you need to look at. So you're looking at your cash flow, your burn rate, your monthly costs, how long you have before you run out of money, and that is something you always need to keep in mind. And that one metric that you need to measure as you grow. So for a ride-hailing app, do you measure the number of daily rides? Is that what is really important to you? And that focuses the minds of everybody in the team. Or do you measure how many drivers you have on board? Or how many customers? Or how much they're spending? So you need to pick that one or two metric that focuses everybody's mind. And then at growth, it becomes the normal finance, if you like. So now you're starting to do proper financial statements. Even you're starting to do an audit because your investors require it. The bank requires it, right? You're no longer a startup that's scrapping around for financial data. And you're looking at your unit economics. So really, what is the cost of your product? Now you have proper historical data, so you can analyze that. So the one common thing between them all, important to measure always, whatever stage of the startup you are. And I liked Abdurrahman's, I don't know if you saw it before, but he said one of the reasons a company acquires a startup is for its cash flow. So if you can have a good cash flow, you can have good income, recurring income coming in, then a competitor would be very interested in acquiring you potentially. So the top 5 tips to mastering cash flow management. I don't know what happened there. So what is cash flow? And I like this saying, revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, but cash is king. Okay, so cash flow is basically money in and out of your startup within a certain time frame. And it's a really good validation and a clue, well or not. So you can be profitable, but run out of cash, depending on your customers. If they're not paying, if you're selling to customers, but they don't pay you on time, then you're going to run out of cash. And that's a really bad thing to happen to your startup. So tip number 1, analyze your business's reality. Abdurrahman talked about Groupon, right? They were growing massively, but their unit economics didn't make sense. They were having to spend a lot of money to grow. They were not profitable, and the customers were not returning. So please be realistic. Sit down and say, is this a business that will make me a profit? Okay, maybe it doesn't make me a profit now, but you have to have a viable pathway to profitability. Long gone are the days where growth was everything and you could rely on venture capital or funding for money. You have to prove that your unit economics work, that the price you're selling your product at gives you a healthy gross profit margin. Okay, maybe not just yet, but eventually. Okay? So that's a really important thing to do. Because no matter how much cash management you do, it's not going to save you if your business fundamentals don't work. And if your business is not viable from a profit perspective. So that's really important thing to do. The other thing to do for your business reality is know your numbers. Please know your numbers. So get a snapshot of your position always. So at the beginning, it's okay to look at your bank statement when you're first starting off. What money have I got coming in? What money have I got coming out? That's okay at the start. But as you grow and as you start to delegate that process to other people, get serious. Produce your statements. Excel is fine. There's a lot of online software that is good, that is cheap, that is super intuitive, like QuickBooks, Zoho, really easy to use and really inexpensive. Get your financials done on time. Now? Yeah. So many startups I know come to me 6 months, 9 months down the line, and they're like, I need to do my financials. The investor's asking for it. The bank is asking for it. And that is not a good way to run your business, right? As you work in your startup, you need to know those numbers. Tip number 2, Do a forecast of your cash inflows and outflows. Okay, again, it doesn't need to be rocket science. There is software out there. You do not need it. Excel is fine. Do 2 cash flows, forecasts. Do a short-term one, 6 to 8 weeks. Do I have enough money for the next 6 to 8 weeks? What money is coming in? What money is going out? And this is not a piece of fiction that you're writing, right? This is not, oh, I'm going to win this huge project. It's going to come in. I know it's going to come in. No. This is reality. What money do I really know is going to come in, and what do I need to pay out? And when you see a gap in your financials, don't just go and hide. People hate it. And it is really painful to see that you're in the red. And if you're not in the red today, that you're going to be in 3 weeks' time. But this is a guide for you to try and do something about it, right? And to be proactive, not to get to 3 weeks' time and say, I can't pay anyone, I'm so sorry, I didn't know. The next cash flow you do is out. So it's a 12 to 18 months. And that helps you with seasonality. So if you know the summer months are going to be super bad for you, you can start to plan. Put your people on holiday. Diversify your revenue streams. Are there different ways that you can make money in the quiet months? There's no shame in diversifying your revenue and going into consultancy for a couple of months to bring in the company money. Right? There is focus to be done on actually building the product, but that product will never get built if the company doesn't have the money to fund it. So if it means that you have to do something in the meantime, that's okay. And that's what that longer term forecast will tell you, right? Where are my gaps and how am I going to fill them? A really simple example just to show you that it doesn't take a lot to do. An Excel sheet, what is the money coming in per week, per month? What is the money coming out? What is my closing balance? So a lot of people hide away from this because they think it needs to be perfect. It needs to be complicated. It needs to have 100 assumptions in it. It does not. It really does not. It needs to be just enough for you to know, am I going to have a problem? Am I okay? Can I pay salaries? Can I pay my vendor? Do I need to chase that person to pay me earlier? That's all it is, okay? Tip number 3, optimize your cash inflows and outflows. So the startups love building their product. They love selling it. But then as an afterthought, they try and figure out how they're actually going to collect their money from their customers. And I love that. Like, how's it going to work? How are you going to invoice? How's the person who's going to invoice going to know? How are you going to collect your money? And I know startups that still get their money by check, right? So the customer will call them, say, the check is ready. Please come and collect it. They go collect the check. They deposit it. Now the customer is super smart, right? Because he's buying himself lots of time here. They collect the check. They go to the bank. It takes 2 days to cash. And in the meantime, that startup is waiting 5, 10 days sometimes for that check. Crazy. Okay? So it's not an afterthought. How you're going to invoice your customers, how you're going to collect your money is not an afterthought. It is really important. And the more you can automate it, the better. So online payments, perfect. I know here it takes a really long time to connect to online payment and get it all set up. And I know you pay fees for that, but those fees are worth it. Not to have to chase those customers and go collect a check. So don't accept checks. Do you chase your receivables? So that's another thing. People don't like to talk about money. They don't like to call their customers and say, you haven't paid me, pay me. You know, they just don't like to do that. But it's important. So find someone in your team that doesn't mind doing that job, and we can week out, day in, day out, chase that money. You've earned it, so chase it. On the flip side are your vendors and suppliers. So don't pay them early. Pay them, just don't pay them early. Some people, they don't have a process of how to pay suppliers. So the email comes in and they just pay it because they think, well, I will forget later. Or how am I going to know that I owe him the money and it's in 30 days, I might as well pay it. Don't do that. Don't do that. So even if you just have an Excel sheet that lists the people that you have to pay, when you have to pay them, do that. Hopefully your cash inflow and outflow forecast will tell you, oh, this week I have these suppliers to pay, I will pay them then. And scan those expenses. Really scan them. I think we're all guilty of subscribing to lots of platforms. Look, I need this, I'll upgrade, I'll pay for this, and then it just keeps running and it just keeps deducting out of your account. So promise yourself that you will go through it every quarter. Do I really need this? And in one of the startups I'm working with, we actually switched them all off and waited for the team members to cry out. If they didn't come saying, why don't I have access to Canva anymore, we knew they actually didn't need it anymore, you know? So that was the one way we did it. Okay, it was a bit harsh, but, you know, sometimes it's required. The cash conversion cycle is one way of doing it. I haven't seen many people doing this, but it's a good guide. So it calculates how many days of inventory you've got outstanding, how many days of sales you've got outstanding. So that is money that you have out in the market, that you've held. Either it's money you've spent on inventory that's sitting in your warehouse, or it's money that you're waiting for customers to give you. Then you deduct the days outstanding from your payables. And the lower the number, the better. In fact, if you can get it negative, perfect. Because negative means that you receive the money from your customers before you're paying your suppliers. Perfect. Okay? The average is about 30 to 45 days. So not ideal, where you're paying your customer and then you're waiting for 45 days to get your money from your customer. You're paying your supplier and then getting it. Not ideal. So for startups, inventory days are usually 0. It's immaterial. An example of days sales outstanding is 45 days, which is the norm here. And then you usually pay your suppliers 30. And so you get 15 days that basically you're out of pocket, right? You've paid someone, and now for 15 days you have to sit tight and wait for your customer to pay you. Not good. Right, tip number 4, consider financing in advance. It's so much easier to get a loan and get a credit card when you don't need it. Sounds ridiculous, I know, but really, if you go to the bank and you try and get a credit card and a loan when you're really stressed and you're really desperate for money, it's terrible. The bank takes months of paperwork and you're back and forth, and bank guarantees and all sorts of stuff. So be prepared, have a contingency plan. When you first start your startup, you're not going to be able to get anything from the bank. They're not going to give you a loan, an overdraft, a credit card. They're just not going to give it to you. But have a contingency plan. Can the founders commit to giving money when it's needed? Right? So if you've done your cash flow and you know that in 3 weeks' time you're going to be really short of money and you have to pay your employees, can the founders commit to it? Can an uncle commit to it? Can you personally finance your car to commit to it? It's just not a conversation to be had when you're desperate. It's a conversation to be had in advance, when everyone is calm and you are not in a position of need. But you know that should it happen, you know what's going to happen, what you're going to need to do. Ask for help. Tip number 5. You don't have to pay expensive fees to finance consultants for this, right? You just don't. There's a lot of help out there. Online, always. But also, there's a lot of startup entities in the ecosystem that provide this consultancy for free or for very little. So do your homework. You know, SAS used to provide this, and MTCIT still provides consultancy help. Riyada does, Al-Jabr does. You know, there's a ton of help out there. Do your homework. If you need a financial expert, and if this stuff scares the living daylights out of you and you don't want to do it, then go and look for some help. You will always find someone who will help you. So that was it. That's the top 5 tips. So analyze your business's reality. Please be conservative, be realistic. Is what I'm planning to do, does it make sense? Is it profitable? Right? Days of growth are gone. You need a viable path to profitability. Please be realistic with this. Forecast your future cash inflows and outflows and get someone else to read it. I've looked at cash forecasts, and they're just a piece of fiction sometimes. You know, you have to be realistic about the money. This is for you. This is not to give to an investor. This is just for you to identify the financial gaps and to start thinking, how can I cover this when it comes? What can I do now to help me in that period? So do it, be realistic, and don't hide when the results come out. Optimize your cash inflows and outflows. Don't make it an afterthought. How am I going to get money from my customers? How quickly can I get it in? Can I put somewhere in there to chase that money? Because you're going to need to. Whatever. Even for online payments, the customers sometimes don't pay. And then, what are my expenses? Do I really need to spend on this today? Maybe yes, tomorrow, but today, do I really need it? Consider financing and contingency in advance. Not a topic people want to talk about up front, but you need to. If we run out of money, what can we do? Who can we go for help? Will the founders contribute? If they will contribute, how much can they contribute? Not everyone can contribute the same, but that's okay. You just need to know in advance and not make any assumptions up front. And the final one is ask for help. So I'm here after this for a couple of hours if you want to come and talk to me. And I can tell you about some of the other entities that can give you advice for free most of the time. So use it and optimize your cash outflows like that. Okay? Okay, pleasure. Pleasure.